a fiscal position to allow us to issue bonds to gain the ability to move the first steps toward a financing plan. The other thing about the objectives as well is we want to start the rate phasing program to replace the water plan, which has been a discussion topic, quite a bit in the city. So we'll make sure we got that going on. And by having a phased in layers of rates, even though it's a pretty significant rate adjustment we're going to discuss later, it does limit rate shock to your customers by allowing for a phase in of rates over time. So that's what we're looking at in terms of the objectives of the study. So we'd like to talk about a little about the utility and rate background, some of the rate drivers and why we're asking for an adjustment to utility rates, water and sewer, detail the interim rates and the impacts of customers, and then discuss next steps or other topics that you'd like to relative to the rate implementation process. There was a brief discussion about the utility, and the utility is accounted for as a enterprise fund for financial reporting purposes. And in this case, it's operated similar to a business. There was discussion about the solid waste being a utility. It's an enterprise fund. And in case of an enterprise fund under Governmental Accounting Standards Board, the cost of providing services are generally recovered through user fees. That's the difference in a tax, which is global. The fees support the utility. And in fact, 96% of your rate revenues or your revenues for the utility comes from the rates for service. So it's very important to have those in line. The other thing, if you think about the utility, water and sewer, they're very capital intensive entities. If you look at your 22 ACFR, or Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, you've got about $96 million on the books of depreciable assets, which is a big number. But if you were to replace those assets today, and the fair market value of those assets today, it could easily be over $400 million. And if you think about renewals and replacements and where you're going and what the industry is seeing, what the nation's seeing relative to utilities, that's what you have to look at as replacement costs. Your assets are aging, and we all know that, and that's an issue that the utility is being faced today. The last time you adjusted rates was back in 2015. You did adopt a 4-year rate adjustment. You can see it's on the screen there. The water side of the implementation of those rates is more of an inflationary type adjustment, around 3% or so, 2.5% to 3%. The wastewater rates were higher. The rates were higher. As I remember way back then, your wastewater rates were very, very low, and we needed the rates needed to be recalibrated. And it was also to fund the East Central Regional water treatment plant facility costs. The other point I want to make, as you well know, the rates have not been adjusted in 5 years, and which is a long time. A lot has happened in 5 years, and we need to reevaluate the financial and rate plan for the utility system. So what are some of the drivers affecting the rates for utility? The first is right now there's limited customer growth in the system. Although we do have growth coming, you're a fairly mature system, and that links to net revenues, and that's a very important term. That's net revenues is the amount of money left over after you pay your operating expenses. By way of example, if I had my paycheck and I paid my food, my electricity bill, and whatnot, what's left over is available for my mortgage and replacing the roof. That's very, very important. You need to maintain those net revenue margins to make sure that you can finance the cost of capital. If growth is limited, then where you get the increase in net revenues is generally through rate adjustments. The key is have a rate phasing plan, a rate implementation plan that meets those needs and meets those margins. The continued inflation of the cost of operations. I know you've heard this many, many times. It's in the news a lot. But if the rates were implemented back in 2015 at 1% to 2% inflation, and now we're double-digit inflation, the rates today don't have those type of escalation factors in them. And so that net revenue margin, that net revenue I was talking about earlier, if that declines, that puts pressure on the ability to do the capital improvements and pay debt service. So that's how that links together. And you can see on the graph at the bottom, that's from 2018 to 2022. I just went and looked at the Consumer Price Index published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's changed by 16.7%. The Engineering News Record has a construction cost index that's fairly low, but it's almost 18%. And the Florida Public Service Commission, it's over 14%. That's just a change in those periods, not the whole period of time that the rates were last changed. But it just gives you an indication of what the inflation is. Yes, sir.
So let me ask you a question. So
Yes, sir.
if we adopted last in, I believe it was, what was that?
2015.
And then that called for increases going all the way through 2019, correct?
Sir.
So you said these rates are not adjusted for these indexes?
No, well, they have not recovered those indexes. Those indexes occurred after the 2019 rates, that phase-in finalized. So you adopted rates in 2015, but for 15, 16, 17, 19, I think that's what the years are. If you look at inflation since 2019, that they've grown over 16 to 20%.
Okay, so my question is, when in 2015, was there a calculation to encompass for potential inflation?
Yes, through 2019, that was the forecast period. So we looked at rates in 2015, and we had inflation built into those rates. But once the rate increases stop, the recovery of that inflation stops along with it. It gets I don't want to say it gets stopped. So inflation keeps going, but the rate increases did not follow it. That's all I'm trying to say. So the margins decline because of the inflationary impact on revenues.
Okay.
By way of example, if I have $1 in my operating expenses were 40 cents, I have 60 cents left over. If I still have $1 5 years later, but that 40 cents became 60 cents, I now only have 40 cents left over. That's that operating margin. That 40 cents is what's used for debt service, capital, things of that nature. And so the only thing I'm trying to say here is that with 96% of your revenues being rates, with limited growth, we want to make sure you maintain a strong operating margin as you move forward. That's a driver. And you can see the increases here that's happened. Even a bigger increase on inflation has been in the cost of capital, infrastructure, construction, and those type of items. And we can talk about that, but this just shows you some increases that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has said from November 2020 to 22. This is some of the changes. What we're seeing out there, and I know your staff can also talk about this. We're seeing significant increases in the cost of construction. Just by a simple way of example, I used to see water plants cost about $10 a gallon, let's say, back in 10 years ago, 8 years ago. That's $25 to $30 a gallon now for the same plant. It's just very, very expensive. We have one client that's doing a septic to sewer program, extending lines. They are now thinking about stalling it or stopping it. The price of the lines are too high. It's just too much. And we're faced with that. And so as these costs increase, that comes into the buying capacity of your plant. You think about that net margin again that we talked about earlier, that's going down and capital costs are going up. And it provides us a strong conundrum that how do we fund that? And so we got to adjust for that. That's a driver for the rates. Add in interest costs, interest rates and whatnot have been higher. That's another impact to rates. Another issue that's affecting the city as well as nationally is the need for asset replacement. We call them renewals replacements. You've heard this term before. It's a major issue. In the plan that we had in the analysis that we were
Councilwoman
doing.
Pro Tem Lanier.
Let me go back to that previous slide.
Yes, ma'am. I'll get there. I've tried. There you go.
So you're saying that in these 2 years that these items have gone up over 100%, some of them?
Some of them have, yeah. Now, that's That's just the change in cost. So yes, the point I'm trying to make here, it's been significant. The cost of infrastructure construction has been significant. And I don't know if you can support me on that, or from what you've seen in the industry, but
Yes, I think as we reported, our increase in lime costs were 28% in 1 year. Our increase in sodium hypochlorite, which is for the chlorine, was over 200%.
Oh,
we had the village of Aquesta, for example, they were getting ready. They're trying to replace their AC pipe, their asbestos cement pipe, and they had an engineer's estimate for a pipe, a segment was around $2 million. The bid came in at 3.6, and this was very recent. This estimate was a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years. When they bid it out, it came in 60% higher. And in fact, we just got off the phone with the Village of Gulf, and they're having the same issues. They're trying to replace a well. They had estimated like $400,000 for the well. It came in at 1.2. Yeah, so this is the kind of impacts that are affecting rates right now, and it's not just you. It's everybody, and the adjustments I'm seeing out there right now are significant. Did that answer your question?
yes.
Okay,
yes,
okay, thank you.
yes.
So of the $95 million in the capital plan that we had, you know, renewals and replacements, that asset replacement, or I call it capital reinvestment or pay-go capital, pay-as-you-go, meaning you get it from rates, you pay it, you don't debt finance it, you fund it from operations, for example. 69% of that $94 million is asset replacement, which knowing your system, I wasn't surprised at that. You know, if you think about Southeast Florida, West Palm, et cetera, this is what I'm seeing. You know, you're fairly mature. You got some assets that are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old. And they're getting, you know, they get tired. And like the line break, I think you mentioned it was built in the 50s. That's 70 years. So it's a long time. So in the plan, we recognize the need that we do have to issue some debt for the wastewater system. We built that into our plan right now. And we've also made sure we have a dedicated renewal and replacement funding program. Your bond resolution, which is the resolution adopted by the district to authorize the issue of senior lien debt on the system, they have certain parameters and rules. One of them is you need to fund a renewal and replacement program or fund. This is deposits to the fund. Doesn't say how you spend it, except for the purpose of it, but you got to put money in. The minimum deposit in that document is 5% of previous year's gross revenues. By way of example, if I have $10 million of revenue, I got to put in $500,000, that 5%, into an R&R fund. I will tell you that's a minimum number, that's low. We are recommending at least get the 7.5%. You should probably be near to 15, I believe. And that was the goal that we're trying to do. In addition to your system, the East Central Regional Operations Board that you get your wastewater service from also has a provision for an R&R fund on the wastewater plant in their square area there. And your agreement says a minimum of 1% of the fair market value of that wastewater plant. Every year they adjust that value up to get the fair market value. Again, when we mentioned your plant, your assets were $94 million on the books, and they could replace them as $400 million. That's how ECR looks at it. They look at the $400 million number and then say we get a percent. Minimum is 1%. It's been averaging between 2.5% and 3.5%, and that's about $1.6 million. We've built that into the rates, as Mr. Sherman said earlier tonight. The last year's payment was made by the use of reserves cash that you had built up on their books for that. So you use reserves per se. They weren't on your books; they're on their books, but you got the credit. That's no longer here. So we got to make sure that we refund that number, and that was about $1.6 million a year.
Mr. Chair.
Yes,
Councilman
sir.
McCoy, go ahead.
So, Mr. Ori,
Yes,
let's
sir.
talk about this funding to 15%. You just kind of touched it real quick.
Sure.
why are you recommending that if our bond documents only require 5%?
Well, because when you look at the cost to replace the asset, the 5% number, although it's a bond document, it's a minimum. It doesn't really cover it. It provides you an ability and intent to set up an R&R, but is it the right level you should be at? We believe that that's way too low. When I've talked to bond attorneys, they just want a provision in there. There's also provisions that may say that 5%, or if a consultant engineer comes in and says it should be a higher value, then put the higher value.
Well, Mr. Ori, why not just adjust this every year? Like, why not tie this to the cost of, I guess, to the same index that the prices of materials is going?
Well, you want to kind of have a certainty in your rate level. You don't want it to go like this. Electric systems, when they pass through purchase power costs and it floats, you want a pretty predictable revenue stream. And so what we're talking about here is the deposits to the fund, not the spending of the fund, which can be lumpy, but the deposits for capital should be linear, predictable. And so we've looked at that and said, okay, if our asset needs for the next 5 to 10 years is another 50, 60 million, how do we fund that and make that level with the goal of getting to a strong R&R fund deposit that improves your fiscal position, but also limits the amount of debt service you'll be issuing in the future.
But there has to be a trade-off, Mr. Ori. So at some point when we build a new water treatment plant, after that place is CO'd and operational, do we still need to be carrying 15%? Because now,
Yes.
Why? I don't understand.
Well, first of all, you got the new plant, but you have all the water and wastewater assets, all the lines, all the pump stations, all the meters, and those are getting old too. And so you have to replace those. But your point of looking at this every year, is why we look at, do 5-year projections or so. Let's say you're right, that 15 should maybe 12. As you're going up to it, then you stop at 12 if that's where it is. And the new water plant will require less renewals and replacements, but you're still going to have to replace the equipment every 10 to 15 years. It's not like it goes away. And so as you look at all your other assets, you develop the plan with the R&R fund to minimize the amount of debt. It is a blend, debt versus PAYCO. Don't misunderstand me. You got that too. But that's why you need a higher value than the 5%.
Thank you, Councilman.
But we're not getting there. I'll tell you that too. We're not going to get there. You should get there over time. It'd be too big of a hit to do that now. So, but you do have the ECR, and they adjust that through their budget process every year.
Right, but at least from our side as well. I mean, I guess if we're going to get there over time, what's the schedule on how we bring that up to 15%?
Start at 5%, and after 5 years, I'm at 7.5. That's what I recommend.
So a 2.5 increase every 5 years?
No. It'd be 5% minimum start. By the 5th year, I tried to get you to 7.5% deposit rate.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, that's
what I said.
Yeah. Well, I did
So,
it over
but
2 years.
what happens
I did it
after
for 4
5?
years. I did it for 4 years.
So what happens after the first increase up to 7.5? Like, we're going to look at another 5 years and then go up another 2.5%?
Well, you will probably do another financial forecast where you evaluate your needs. If 7.5% R&R deposit is reasonable, then I would recommend you stay there. If what I think is going to happen is you need to get to say 10% or 12%, do that over another 5 years. Do it slowly so you minimize the rate impact to your customers and allow small numbers and keep looking at it.
Okay, thank you.
That's the plan.
Thank you.
It's fluid.
Thank you.
And as you know, a major driver is the water treatment plant construction. This is a very good example.
Okay, so hold on one second.
Yes, sir.
I was waiting on you to tell me what ECRWRF means.
Oh, I'm
on
sorry.
the previous.
Let me get back there for you. Sorry. There you go. ECRWRF is East Central Regional Water Reclamation Facility. That's your ECR plant that West Palm, that you're a member of, and West Palm administers it. That's the wastewater plant. You are a participant And there's an R&R requirement on that plant as well as your assets as well. Sorry about that. But the water treatment plant's a really good example of all these issues if you think about it. First is asset age. It's old and it needs to be replaced. That's that renewal replacement discussion we were having earlier. Second is the cost of inflation and whatnot on that plant is significant versus what you built it for and what it may be built, what you may come in at. It could be $200 to $300 million. We don't know the number yet. You're working on that, but it's not going to be 50, and it's going to be high. And if it's $200 million, that could be, and let's say you have no grant funds, which I think you're going to get grant funds, talking to staff, that it could be another 10 to 13, $14 million of debt service, depending on what the value of that plant is and how much you have to finance. The plant has not been built into our analysis yet. I wanted to get everything kickstarted, to be honest with you. We don't have $200 million of debt in our analysis, but we are setting aside money to start getting there, which I'll talk about in a second. So, and the reason why we didn't do that, we don't know the price. We don't know the contributed capital we may get, the grants, the outside monies coming in. If the city got $50 million of grants, well, I don't want to bond 200. I want to bond 150. That's a big difference. So we don't want to set rates for something that may not happen. And the plant's not going to be built. It's going to take a couple of years to build it. You'll have a better feel for that. But we have in the rate adjustments we're requesting, we are moving toward funding that plant, and we have debt capacity built into those rate adjustments to start the bonding process. Is what we're doing. We're going to get there. We know it's going to be significant. So that's a good example of a factor affecting rates. It is a lot. We want to make sure we promote a strong fiscal position. I mentioned that bond resolution to you earlier, which is your authority that the district has adopted. The resolution allows you to issue senior lien bonds or parity bonds to finance capital improvements. There's a lot of covenants and rules and items in there. One is called a rate covenant, which you have to have a certain level of that net revenues. I talked about earlier, that net revenue margin that covers the debt payment. The minimum requirement is your net revenues, gross revenues minus your operating expenses, give you net revenues, has to be at least 1.2 times the debt service payment. So if my debt service payment says 10 million, my net revenue has to be at least 12 million. 12 million minus a 10 gives me 2 million left over. That's 120%. How that works. And it gets back to the same question you asked about the R&R, Mr. McCoy, is that coverage ratio is also low. It's a minimum. Because people will say, well, why don't you just target 120? Well, that 20%, if you think about it, is what's left over. The 12 minus the 10 gives you 2. What's that 2 used for? Capital reinvestment. That's or operating reserves. That's what it's used for. So if that number is way too low, you don't have a strong R&R, that 7.5% we just talked about. So but you have this requirement in your bond resolution. So we got to maintain a strong fiscal position. Not only do we want to meet that, we have to meet this, but you must fund all your other requirements. The R&R fund deposit we talked about earlier, the East Central Regional R&R, payment in lieu of taxes that we have to talk about. And there's also an additional bonds test requirement. You have to have your rates at certain levels to issue bonds. Now, why am I saying all this? We got bonds coming. We have debt financing coming. And we have to be in a fiscal position to be able to issue that debt. Moody's, Standard & Poor's, Fitch, they're going to look at you and say, where are you fiscally? How are you financially? What is your rate plan? They're going to ask all that. And so we're trying to help you develop that so we can issue the debt and fund the programs, and let's get these assets replaced is what we're trying to do here. I know it's a lot. I know it's confusing, but so what we're recommending the wastewater system is 27% rate adjustment up front, followed by an 8%, and then get back to price index inflation. So we think this will cover you going forward unless there's some catastrophe that we're not aware of. Why 27% up front? Why not try to smooth it out? When you think about it, if you got $12 million of revenue in the water and sewer, in wastewater revenues now, 12 million, 1.6 is ECR debt R&R funding that you didn't do last year. You just take 11 million, 1.6 divided by 11, there's 10 to 12% right there, just on that one item. We also need to fund the capital program for wastewater in that $98 million of CIP that we had. We're probably going we know we need to issue some sort of financing, some debt for that. And that's why we have that built in. And it allows you to start moving your renewal and replacement deposit to 7.5%. So we think after you get past this near term, that in this case, I think you'll be in a good position. Now, if inflation drops to 1%, those 3%ers at the tail end could probably also drop as well, just so you're aware of that. And the second thing about the 20 upfront is we're trying to, remember I talked about the recapture of all that inflation on the cost of operations. You know, because you haven't adjusted your rates since 2019, and inflation's been 15, 20% or so. That margin is dropping, and we're recapturing that as well. That's why we call it a cost recovery correction, the cash flow. Wastewater, we have the same phenomena, lower rates, and we fully recover the cost of service here as well as we're recommending, and it initiates the rate phasing plan for the water treatment replacement financing. We don't have the debt service built in. You haven't borrowed any money yet, but we're starting to put money aside and cash flow aside to help finance that. Or number two is we gain additional funds. This will generate additional funds. We can buy down, not issue as much debt for the long-term benefit of sustainable rates. We're looking at both. I will tell you, if the plant comes in significantly at a high rate, 200 million, whatever the number is, there will be more rate adjustments coming. I'm not going to say this is it. I don't think it will be. Unless we get grant funding, a lot of grant funding and those type of benefits, then you'll see something totally different. But I need to tell you that. And so that's why we want to go ahead and get this started. It's also time value of money. The earlier you get these rates in effect, the higher the cash flow immediately. And that gives you a lot more flexibility in your financing plan as you move forward with your capital plan and including your water plant replacement. So the rate adjustment is fairly significant. You can see here for the average customer using 6,000 gallons of service, you can see the rates would go up to about $85 from right around $69. The surveyed utility average I'll show you is about $80. So you're not out of the range of unreasonableness compared to the region at all. Also, that $80 is today's rates for these utilities, which I'll show you right now. Those are today's rates. I will tell you in 2 weeks, half of those utilities are probably going to be raising their rates. Wellington's is 10%. I know West Palm Beach is going, I think, 4% sewer, 2% water, and they're commissioning a rate study right now because it's not enough. What else can I tell you? Jupiter, I believe, just raised their water rate 7%. You mentioned Lake Worth could be, I think, and Boynton could be 10 to 15%. Yeah. Melbourne just raised their rates 14%. I have on the west coast of Florida, which has a lot of growth and a lot of infrastructure need. Just by way of example, not that this makes the problem go away, but Hillsborough County just adopt rate increases to 2032, 6% a year minimum for 2032. Lee County, 8% a year for 5 years straight. Manatee County is 9.75%, first two, looking at another 3. I mean, that's the cost of the infrastructure impacts on rate adjustments with the high inflation. And you can see, yes, you move up, but as these other utilities raise their rates, your competitiveness or position on that graph will become more in the middle, is what I'm seeing here. But I would say Village of Palm Springs is needing a rate adjustment. They're going out for a rate adjustment as well. I don't know what the number is at this point in time. Village of DeQuesta just raised their water rates. They did an emergency additional 5% increase above their indexing, and then adopted a $10 a month, this is just water, a $10 a month capital recovery charge to implement or start their AC pipe replacement program. They've got 29 miles of AC pipe that's 50 to 70 years old. And they're doing that. I mean, that's just water, but that's the kind of issues that are out there right now. I don't know if you have anything else you may want to add or anything, but that's what we're
I
seeing.
would just say, I wish I only had 50 miles of AC pipe.
Yeah. You have a lot of AC pipe?
Mhm.
Yeah.
70% of our system.
70?
70% of
Wow.
the system, yeah.
So our recommendations is, adopt the interim rates for 24, 25. You can adopt the whole program, but those first 2 years are definitely critical. In any year that you don't have an adopted rate adjustment through a study, I would index those rates every year based on some inflationary index, consumer price index, water and sewer maintenance. That way, at least you got a mechanism to try to keep that operating margin stable, which is the bottom line for capital. And I would strongly recommend that you around 2026, well, I do it every year, but redo the financial forecast. If the costs come in lower, if grant fund comes in, if inflation drops, change the program and keep it right sized to your need. And I think that will be a benefit to the customer as well. And I think that concludes my presentation. And if you have any questions or any thoughts or anything you'd like to discuss, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Thank you so much. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comments?
No, sir, you've already heard them.
Thank you. Board
Mr.
members? Councilwoman Botel.
Yeah, a question. I don't know whether it's for Mr. Evans, Mr. Lowe, the gentleman who's presenting. What would happen if we didn't increase the rates? What would happen if we decide, well, this is not something we want to do? Walk us through what happens if that's the case. Mr. Evans.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Mr. Evans, go ahead.
I'll turn that over to our rate consultants and Mr. Lowe. I'll come behind them.
Well, let's make it easy. You didn't do anything. Let's just do that. That's you couldn't do the capital improvement program at all.
Right.
I'll tell you that right now. You'd have to defer everything. And my old mentor said, utilities are forgiving. You cannot do anything for them for a long time, but once they start breaking, AKA Australian pipe break, they start breaking. And if your pipe is 50 to 70 years old, you know what's coming. You may, it could start breaking. So if you didn't do it, you couldn't do the CIP. You'd have to defer. I know you'd probably raise rates to some level. The key is, do you raise them enough? If you don't raise them enough, the water treatment plant financing, I'm not sure how you're going to do it, to be honest with you, unless you get a lot of through the capital. If you don't manage the system, I don't know if someone would, someone come in and take it over for you.
So we would lose the ability to have the control of our own utility district.
Easily you could, yeah.
What happened? Why didn't we raise the rates in 2019, 2020?
Why didn't we?
Yeah. Why are we now at a point?
Well, it was brought to the attention of the district several times, and it was just, too much, 6%. I think we had 1 year, we had like 6.5%ers on water. We started seeing the water plant cost, starting to come into the picture. And I think 2 years after that, we had 5 years of 6%. It was a lot, but all of a sudden we didn't have the conditions we have today. We didn't have double-digit inflation. We didn't have, 50% increases in capital costs like you're seeing now. And so all the conditions have kind of changed to the negative for you and everybody. And now we're playing some catch up, I think, telling the
Thank you.
truth.
Hey, Councilman Pro Temp, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my head around this in the sense that, not just in terms of, our water and the cost of doing business and the cost of goods and services. Everything has
Everything.
gone up.
Everything.
And it is becoming very scary in a sense for people who have fixed incomes and people who have, minimum wage jobs. And I really want to, be able to increase and change our water. I want to be able to have a situation where we have water, we don't have to buy water. That's not the case now. And we're going to have to bite the bullet to pay for this.
You are.
Um,
The not to interrupt you,
No.
but I was talking about the gallons over there. I guess it's 1,000 gallons. First of all, this is an essential service, as you very well know. You cannot live without it. I mean, I thank the lucky stars we're not in Phoenix. They don't have any water right now, it seems like, and there's horror stories out there. And it is expensive, but still a pretty good value. You think about what the cost is per gallon for you to deliver water to my house 24/7, whatever I wanted, and take all my wastewater away without me ever leaving, and treat it to standards. It's a pretty good deal. Now, I'm not helping you by any means because it's still a big increase.
Yeah.
I get that, but what I was least happy to see right now is you're not at the high end, and everybody else is going to be raising their rates. Like Wellington's 10% increase, which is right in the middle, is not in those numbers because they haven't implemented them yet. I don't like to show them on the rate comparison till they've implemented them. I know they've now adopted them. I believe they've now adopted them. So they're going to move up $7. They're going to be right about where you are now, what we were proposing. So I guess, I was happy you weren't Wilton Manors or the town of Davie, where they're already at $125 for 6,000 gallons in the town of Davie. In fact, they're looking at selling their system because they can't implement it. And so
Yeah.
we don't want that. We don't
And
want
I
that.
think that's what I fear the most is someone coming and taking control of our water
Yes, ma'am.
supply.
Yes,
I think that there are groups that go around the country and say, you know what, we'll pay for all that for you, but we own it. So it becomes a situation where do we want to maintain control of that? And have it where it's something within our purview. It is something that the city of Riviera Beach actually owns.
Right.
I think that even when we're talking about the new water plant, just the repairs themselves, I think that in the last 4 years, we've put 20 to 30 million just in repairs alone. So
And we're spending cash. The other thing, what you're also alluding to, in my mind, the cash that's earned on your system stays in your system. You're not paying me as a stockholder, like these private utilities are doing. Everything that's earned, and maybe your rates may be a little higher, let's say for some reason, it at least stays with you. And I'm a real big believer of public ownership. Well, that's one of the reasons, personally, is that you control it and you maintain it and you earn it and you reinvest it back for your customer. It may not look like it, but that's exactly what you're doing. And which I think is a really good thing.
yeah, I think
So-
that, everybody in here lives here.
Oh, yeah.
So we will all be affected by it.
Right.
It's just the fact of what do we want? Do we want to improve our water system? Do we want to maintain ownership of it? And how do we look at this in such a way that it doesn't just kill us off the bat?
I will tell you, if a private utility came in and bought this system, you don't think they would
Yeah.
not raise rates? I will tell you, they'd raise rates a lot more than that when they buy it. And there's some other things going on in the PSC that I won't go on that detail unless you want me to. I could talk about this for hours, but they would raise rates immediately because they have to get a
Make
rate of
them-
return
right.
so I can pay you as my stockholder. The cash just left the system.
Yeah.
And they're not going to stop. I'm not saying they stop the private, but I'm just letting you know that I'd rather personally I'd rather control it or have a local government.
Control ownership
control
of it.
Personally, I think so.
Yeah,
And also you can borrow money cheaper.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Board members?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Ms. Evans, go ahead.
Just to provide a little bit of context as well and some visuals for those that are at home. And Walter, I don't know if you can pan over to what is equivalent to 1,000 gallons of water that we have here in the room. And so during the workshop discussions that we've had with the community, we provided to them what the visualization is for 1,000 gallons of water in the city of Riviera Beach. Now, the normal consumer on a monthly basis consumes about 6,000 gallons. And so that 1,000 gallons costs $3.37 at the new rate, and that's delivered to the homes here in Riviera Beach. We have some items, and I believe Ms. Bram provided you all with some visuals with regards to some of the daily items that we pick up at the store, and you will see virtually everything that you consume, from ketchup to bottled water to even laundry detergent, you are purchasing for far more than what you would purchase for 1,000 gallons of water. And so that was a good visual representation that we wanted to show folks, that for $3.37 at the new rate, that's how much water that you will be provided in the city of Riviera Beach. So to put things into context, and we wanted to have it set up here in the room for those that were here as well. And the communication sessions that we had with the residents was very well attended, from the standpoint that persons that were there went through the exhibit, got a good understanding for the utility operation, and staff had the opportunity to explain what they were doing and how expensive every nuance of the utility district is. Them, police and fire, everything that they do is expensive. And the cost for the services and the cost for all the commodities, like Mr. Lowe communicated, 28% increase on lime. We have a lime treatment process. It is the core of what we do. And so this is getting us prepared for what the next iteration of the Riviera Beach water plan is. We have had some very productive conversations on other funding streams that are available to the city that are going to buy down what that potential cost for a new water treatment plant is. And you also should see construction-related activities on the site. Mr. Loaf, correct me if I'm wrong, towards the first of the year, if not sooner, on the existing site. So things are happening. There's a very complicated process that an agency has to go through in order to provide bottled or potable water to the community. And we are regulated more than bottled water companies. And so if you were to run our water through the same sampling and testing as you would from a bottled water company, there's different standards that we have to meet as a public water supply source than a private provider. And Mr. Love, you can touch on any other comments germane to the point.
Yes, someone's whispered the dreaded letters in my ear, PFAS. The plant is actually producing everything to meet primary, secondary drinking water standards. And yes, there's a tremendous amount of testing that has to go into that. We are doing hundreds of tests every month on the system, checking every aspect of it. So there's a lot of concern and oversight of what we're doing. The plant project, we're working as fast as we can. Actually, I'm involved almost every single day in a meeting about the plant project. We are very close to reaching the point where we'll have the basis of design report. That's an official document that details basically the roadmap that they're going to finish the design to. And we're expecting to see that in the middle of October. So there's a lot of reports coming our way. We have a firm working with us that helps oversee each one of these documents as it comes out to check that everything works out for us going forward. It's a very collaborative process that we're going through. There's a lot of workshops we have in the next few weeks as we go through individual parts of the process or the equipment that we're going to use. So hopefully by the end of October, we'll have the next indication of where cost is. and we are going to look to see whether we can start some of the work early. We have already ordered fencing to bring the fence up to Blue Heron, and we're going to put a wrap around it that indicates what's going on with some pictures of what things might look like. So we also have a website that the GC, the general contractor, has put together. There are cards around. We'll leave them out around City Hall and other places that people can pick up. And they have a QR code on the back that, yes, the QR code lets you go to the website, and they'll be keeping that up to date and showing everybody what's going on within the project. There's also an ability to ask questions, and they have an email address, and people will respond to those questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Board members? Councilman, go ahead.
Yes. Can someone put up the, so we can understand this, the rate schedule, please? That's a part of the backup. That goes into effect October 1. It's And I think, Mr. Lowe, Monday when I seen you, I asked you about the utility meter, and I think I asked Gary and Nick the size of the utility meter, and I think they said it was a 5/8 connection.
Yes, generally a 5/8. That's for a normal household. It's a 5/8 connection.
Well, help me understand what that means, because when I'm looking at this rate schedule, I don't see 5/8 represented as one of those type meters.
I think 5/8 and the 3/4, they're both on the same rate.
Okay, well, we don't need to think, if we're going to adopt something, it needs to be correct inside of the rate schedule, because most every single family household or townhouse has 5/8, so it's not even reflected on the rate sheet. And essentially, that's what we're going to be adopting.
Yes, I think what's occurred is as they've modernized the system and the newer meters don't need to have the same size, so we'll need to reflect that correctly in the rates.
I'm sorry. We would need to do what?
We've changed from 3/4 to 5/8, and we need to properly correct and show that in the rates.
Precisely my point. So when he clicks this, you'll see that 5/8 is not represented on this rate schedule.
Mhm.
So right there in the first column, and this is going into effect on October 1. I think I'm a little bit confused. So Mr. Evans, you had a $3.39 for the every 1,000 gallons, I believe it was.
Sure.
Mr. Evans, go ahead.
Yes, sir.
So that's not reflected here. It shows $3.13. Am I missing something, or how do you correct that? And can that be zoomed in or something, Mr. Stevens? So I think we need to be at page 1. Okay, so Mr. Evans, so just so I'm clear, should that amount that you were referencing been $3.13, or is it $3.39? Because
I think we were looking at the 337 at that residential.
that seems like that's for irrigation system separate and apart from water.
Well, I think from that point, we were looking at what the the worst case scenario with that 1,000 gallons. So the water side is 313, but you're 337, 313.
Okay. So at the least $3.13, which is an increase from what are we currently paying per gallon, per 1,000 gallons? Is it $2 and
Believe it's 281.
so what's not clear here is there a change to the readiness to serve charge or just the actual,
Yes, same thing.
pardon?
Yes, the readiness to surcharge and the volumetric charge are adjusted. They both combined make your rate revenue.
Okay, so are you suggesting the $20.52 is the current, well, I guess that's the proposed rate for standard 3/4 or in Mr. Lowe's situation, 5/8.
Yeah,
Type.
they both be there, and that's your typical single-family residential home, and probably half of your commercial
And it's-
customers at that rate.
Would it be safe to say that our current rates are 28% less? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know where you're getting that number from. What's 28%?
That's what's proposed on, well, actually, that's
Oh,
on
you mean that's
wastewater.
the rate increase?
Yes.
That has, I believe, that has the 27% in it for water.
20% on water and 27% on
27 for water,
wastewater.
27 cents for sewer. That's in these numbers.
So 20% would be
Um,
21,
cents.
42 cents.
I'm sorry?
So the readiness to serve charge is 42 cents less. So that's $20 and 10 cent is our current readiness.
Hold on a second. Yeah, go ahead. I got you.
Mr. McCray, you're trying to figure out what our current rates are?
Yes.
Okay. So the current rates, and again, we'll talk on the first line,
1710.
the readiness is 1710, and that will go up to 2052. So we took every rate that we currently have and we increased it either the 20% or the 27%.
Okay. And then the current 1,000 gallons is how much?
Or a water charge right now, it's 261, and then it goes to 357, 470, and 591 for each tier.
Okay, I'm just speaking of the first tier.
Okay, 261,
Okay.
and that'll go up to the 313.
All right. So explain why does this say the first 5,000 gallons? Because I don't see another tier beyond 5,000.
On the rate schedule, under the usage charge. So if you stick with the yellow, which is the water, the far right column.
So I thought we were waiting on that. I thought that's exactly what we said. We were going to tier that with the.
We took every rate that we currently have. So that's the tiers that we currently operate on. And again, everything went up 20%. Phase 2, or step 2 in this process that you approved back in August, will be to go through and restructure these rates to find out, are the meter rates the same, right for residential? Is residential too high? Commercial should be, lower. And I think Mr. Ori will, sorry, I only got, will remember when these rates came out in 2015, the readiness charge went up considerably and the consumption charges actually went down a little bit. That was 8 years ago. So now as we go through and look at it, those numbers will all, in essence, get realigned.
Okay. So what I'm looking at is in that center column for irrigation. So there's no, I guess I don't understand what that means. Commercial is there. I don't understand how that's different. Why do we set different rates for commercial versus multifamily, for example? And how do you handle mixed use?
Well, that's a real good question. That one's a very good question. First of all, commercial is a whole different class than residential. They have different demand characteristics, and they have and their water use is very different. Where residential has a lot of discretionary use, outdoor irrigation, for example, you don't see that in commercial. You don't see that in multifamily. And so they're different. The cost of serving them is different. Commercial also generally has a higher demand on the system. You know, a restaurant, an Applebee's uses a lot more water than your home, for example, generally. And so the rates are different. And the reason why you have a two-part rate with some subtleties to it, the base charge, that fixed charge, does not vary by flow. It's kind of called readiness to serve. And it's there to, you know, recognize that we have to have that capacity to serve you 24/7. And it's very common to have a rate like that. The Florida Public Service Commission utilizes this structure as well in their private regulation. The second thing that base charge does for you, Mr. McCoy, is it provides revenue stability. You always get the base charge. You know, your flow charge can go up and down based on if you're there or not there, occupancy of the house, whatnot. But that base charge you get every month. And so it provides a lot of stability for you. Number two is the rate agencies really like that a lot, Moody's, S&P, et cetera, because again, promotes stability. So you'll see that. On the volumetric rate, that's there to promote water conservation. We know that the water management district is going to be looking at that, and they actually probably want to have a higher incentive of water conservation, especially on the residential class. That's where most of your discretionary use is, but they're going to look at all the classes. They look at you in totality. If you agree. So.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I can concur. We're in discussion with the Water Management District for the consumptive use permit. And one of the big emphases that we are getting from them is how they're going to mandate conservation upon us. With everyone coming into South Florida, they're trying to preserve the potable water as much as possible. So they are really pushing us hard on our conservation efforts.
And also, just so you're aware, irrigation here would be separately metered irrigation. It's if you have 1 meter to your house and you're watering your yard, you're a single meter. But if you've got a separate irrigation meter, I'm sorry, thank you very much. If you have a separate irrigation meter, then you have a separate charge attached to that. Just so if you're wondering why you have that irrigation, it's a individual requested irrigation meter. You don't have a lot of those. Basically, it's water and sewer is what you see. But just to, I know I saw you look. You were thinking about that earlier. That's why I want to mention that to you.
Yeah. And just so I'm clear, so the same is for sewer as well. Sewer went up, is being proposed to go up for 28%,
27, right?
27%,
Right.
and that takes the new per 1,000 gallons to $3.58.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And that's up from what, Mr. Sherman? And then there's a readiness component as well to that. So the readiness went up as well on that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And it's 282 was the volume rate before that, and the readiness to serve was 1755. Thank you.
54.
Oh, 54. That's what I got. Yes.
And the 282, so how do we measure the usage of 1,000 gallons? Or is that just
On wastewater?
yes?
That's a good question as well. I didn't answer your other question. Let me get back to that one too. Wastewater is usually based on the metered water, domestic water use at the house, because you don't have a separate meter on wastewater. Generally, you just don't. So, how much water goes into your that you use at your house, for example, forms the basis of the usage charge for the wastewater that's being returned back to the wastewater system. That's one reason why people will get irrigation meters if they think that they're got a lot of outdoor use. They don't want to pay sewer on that, and so that's why you have that. That's how it's based.
So is that customary?
Oh yes, very customary. Oh, definitely.
There is a ceiling on it,
Yeah.
Councilperson.
Yeah.
So once you get beyond a certain point, they just charge you for water and they don't
10,000
increase your
gallons, I
wastewater.
think.
Is that reflected in this schedule?
Yes,
And what's that? What's that?
I believe it's 10,000 gallons. Yes, 10,000 gallons.
Okay,
Right. And
So-
the reason for that is, sorry to interrupt you, it tries to give you a relationship that not all the water being used at the house will be returned back to sewer. And that's very, very common as well. That's a fairness thing. I know some utilities that charge 1-to-1. 100% water in, 100% water, sewer out. I know that. I think what you do is a lot more fair, that, not all the water going into a house is returned to the wastewater system. You wash your car, you water your yard, for example, that's not returned.
okay, so
That's customary.
okay, so my next question is,
Mhm.
what's the average, Mr. Sherman, on an average household in the amount of 6,000 per month?
That's pretty statewide average for the typical year-round type of customer.
So I guess, and this is interesting. So the usage that I'm seeing right here that's tiered, was that done before? So beyond 10,000 gallons had a different amount as we currently stand, Mr. Sherman? Or is that new? So that second column to the, I guess the second,
This is the same tiered approach that we've had
so it's just been
since 2015.
20%
Yep,
across the board for
Correct.
water?
correct. And the 10,000 is the same for the wastewater.
We're going to look at that.
Right. We'll look.
So my question is, so if I got 10,500 gallons of usage, so you're saying you're going to go back to the very first gallon and charge me $5.62, or I'm going to
I was
be,
getting ready to get to that. The first 5,000 gallons is $3.13.
but that's not what it says here. Look at
Yes.
the
First
cell,
5,000.
right? But now look at the cell right beneath it.
Next 5,000.
So that's not what it says. It says first 10,000.
Mine says next 5,000.
Okay, so look, okay, I'm talking about the cell on the second row, first column. So if I go up to 10,000, it says $5.62.
That's the commercial.
I don't see that anywhere. Oh, okay, that's commercial.
Commercial, right.
No.
The second box.
Oh, that is.
Yeah, that's commercial. I'm sorry, I was looking at residential. I apologize. I thought you were talking.
No, so help me, show me where it says on here, if I have a 5/8 for a 3/4 meter, that once I get to 10,000, because I don't see that on here.
How it works is if you
Okay, but I'm asking you to get a pointer and show me on this, because if I got $10,000, 10,000 gallons of water usage, 10,500 gallons of water usage, how much am I paying? And show me on this rate schedule, please.
10,500, you said?
Yes,
Okay.
because I don't see that here.
Okay.
I only see that applies for the,
Say it stops at 10,000.
Yeah, this is that. Okay, for water, if you look at the yellow to the left, you pay $20.52 range to serve, plus $1.24 meter replacement charge, because the meter's separate and distinct, equals $21.76. Now you got 10,500 gallons, right? The first 5,000 gallons would be 5 times 313. Okay, 5,000 gallons at 313 per thousand. The next 5,000, i.e. 6,000 to 10,000, is at 428, I think it is, 428 per thousand.
so that's not what that says. So I'm asking for the scenario of a 5/8 meter
Yeah,
or a 1-inch meter. So you're saying you automatically escalate to the second 1-inch row?
Well, okay, wait.
I think I understand.
Okay.
So if you're looking at the yellow,
Is there a
column
pointer?
that's
I
the-
mean, is there a
the-
pointer or something?
And I don't have one.
the column that's the usage charge, where it says per thousand, that is, and I understand those 4 lines are throughout the entire schedule. It's not just on, it's not on the 2-inch meter or the,
Over here.
you got one? There you go. All right.
Where was it? Sorry,
There we
I'm
go.
sorry, I didn't-
Okay, so you're right. This is the 3/4 or 5/8, right? It's 2052, 124, adds up to the 2126. These numbers here are for all the meters.
Well, it should no, you got to correct that, Mr. Sherman, because I'm under the position that if I only use If I use 8,000 gallons, you better not be charging me $4.28 because that's not what it says there. It says that's for a 1-inch meter.
And we can clarify the
Clarify.
schedule and put
I
some.
mean, we're
correct.
gonna
I
get
see
beat
what
up
you're
already
saying.
for this.
But yeah, this 428 does not go with just this line. This scale, these tiers go with every meter in that class.
How can you? I understand what you're explaining, but
Yeah.
how can we get that corrected? Is that something that can be corrected so that it's
Yeah.
very clear? Because
Yeah.
you know,
We can that. I mean,
Mr. Sherman, your office is deep in finance, but I can tell you when I come into City Hall, your team is on. You know, they are really taking a lot when it comes to those people that's walking in there addressing issues about billing. So they need to be able to, without any kind of confusion, be able to point right to the adopted rate schedule and say, hey, this is what has been approved by the board. And here's why. You got a 5/8 meter, not a 3/4, but a 5/8 meter. You spent 6,000 gallons. And I'm looking at this.
Gotcha.
I'm on the belief that I should be paying $3.13
Yeah.
for every 1,000 gallons.
and we'll correct that. I mean, these are the schedules we've been using for but I understand your concern, and we can certainly. It's a homegrown schedule. We can clarify that. And that the same thing, just as we go, the same thing for the commercial. These usage charges go for every size meter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councilman McCoy.
I just need to know how we're going to fix it. I mean, this is like we got one shot at this, Mr. Sherman. Can you give me something to tell me how you can address this? Because we're adopting not the resolution. Effectively, we're adopting resolution, but this is what ultimately is.
Yeah. Well, we can put something in the title here. Hold me, and then what we'll do is we'll actually probably put a separate line here to separate it so it doesn't look like it goes horizontal. That's its own category.
Okay, thank
We
you.
can
That's
do
all.
that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So
Thank you, Board Member
where are we
Gordon.
going with this? Because I got some other questions outside of the rate schedule. So now that we've gotten that clarified.
They've already completed the presentation, so you can go ahead and ask your questions, Councilman.
Okay, so to the point that I think was raised here, and I literally just wrote this down. I probably lost it. Oh, here it is. But if you want to know why we're in a situation like this, we got here in April of 2019, and there's been 8 different persons. Well, let me say 8 different persons. There was 8 individuals that held the slot of utility district special director. And this board directed, or at least gave their authority to hire a utility special district director to the city manager. I think that's a huge problem. Like, one person cannot do everything, and one person should not be able to manage everything. But I'm gonna run down this list. Mr. Horton, then came Ms. Deirdre Jacobs, then Mr. Leighton Walker, then Jonathan Batista, then back to Ms. Deirdre Jacobs, then Jimmy Johnson, then back to Deirdre Jacobs, and then now Mr. Lowe. So, I mean, clearly, at what point do we recognize that we have to have some sort of stability? I think when we have turnovers, that probably exponentially makes things much more worse and difficult. I mean, I just believe that we made a bad mistake when we first started. I think consistency and exactly. I met a guy who literally at a conference, it was completely random that he's seen that I was from Riviera Beach, and we had a long conversation. But everything that Mr. Horton tried to suggest early on was the very issues that we're trying to. You have one person that's managing 3 different entities, and it's not working. Hence why you got such a big problem right here. Because if we would have had one person that's solely responsible for the utilities part of distribution, for the water treatment part, and for the billing, then that's one person that's responsible. It is separated as an enterprise fund and as a separate independent district for the very purposes it was intended to run and operate independent of any kind of control. It says it in our charter. So if you want to see why we have these kind of problems, it's because we had 8 different utility special district directors. Well, not 8, but we at least had 5, and then one who's the who's been very diligent. Ms. Jacobs has been in that role at least 3 times. So I would tell you that we have to have stability in these positions without turnover, because these kind of issues, obviously, we recognize have been going on well before we even gotten here. But I think we have to fix it at this point. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman McCoy. Board members? Madam Clerk?
Board Member Botel,
Yes.
Board Member Miller Anderson,
Yes.
Board Member McCoy,
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Lanier,
Yes.
Chairperson Lawson.
Yes.
That vote passes, Mr. Chair, unanimously.
Thank you. Madam Clerk? 7C?
Resolution number 23-23 UD, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the City of Riviera Beach Utility Special District, Palm Beach County, Florida, recommending the approval of an agreement between Utility Special District and Keltor USA Incorporated to provide lift station replacement panel, authorizing the utility district chairperson and district clerk to execute this agreement, authorizing the Director of Finance and Administrative Services to make payment from project numbers 24012 and 24103 at a not-to-exceed cost of $986,765.14 and providing for an effective date. Mr. Chair, we do not have any public comment cards on this item. The acceptance of public comment cards on item 7C is now closed.
Motion to approve resolution number 23-23 UD.
Second.
Motion been made and properly seconded. Mr. Evans?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, if I can have Mr. Lowe and our senior procurement specialist, Ms. Tanisha Boyden, to make this presentation.
Good afternoon, Board, Chair. The Procurement Department assisted the USD Department with soliciting an invitation to bid for the purpose of purchasing lift station replacement panels. The solicitation posted for 14 days. And in response to the solicitation, we received 3 bid responses. After completing our procurement internal vetting process, Keltor US Inc. was deemed the lowest responsible bidder in response to the solicitation. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer.
Thank you, Ms. Boyd. Board members? Thank you for your comments. Did we have any public comment cards, Madam Clerk?
No, sir, you don't have any public comment card.
Thank you. Roll call, please. But it wouldn't, it needed to be in when we read the comments, ma'am. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Board Member Board Member Miller Anderson,
Yes.
Board Member McCoy,
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Lanier,
Yes.
Chairperson Lawson.
Yes.
That vote passes, Mr. Chair, unanimously.
Mr. Chair.
Councilman McCoy.
So I was going to ask Mr. Sherman, I've emphasized this twice on this rate schedule. I see he just stepped out, but I want to make sure before this is adopted that we have a corrected rate schedule that's very clear and without any question. Can we be assured that that's going to be provided to us so we can know what that looks like? I mean.
Chair, if I may.
Mr. Evans or Mr. Sherman?
We can make the tweak that was discussed and provide that to the board.
Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion and deliberation, Executive Director?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may, just to speak on a certain matter that was brought up with respect to attrition happens in a variety of positions throughout the agency. I think if you ask Mr. Sherman or ask folks that have been here, I think I'm probably the 7th or 8th city manager that they've worked through in their particular tenure. And so I would argue that the progress that we've made on the utility district far exceeds what others have done in this particular role. And we are moving the agency forward, and we are going to be moving construction activities on a new water treatment plant. So I don't think it's a reflection on administration with regards to attrition that we've had. People leave for multiple reasons, and we're committed on working together with the board to move forward. But I don't think it is a reflection or an issue with regards to administration as to who is assisting in the management of the operation. Certain people leave for certain reasons, and they have that choice. We're just focused on moving the agency forward. So I do want to, speak to that, because that is not, in fact, the case that the utility district is struggling with regards to the agency and where we plan to move it. And the board knows that. So that concludes my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Evans. Mr. Lowe?
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
City Attorney?
No
District
comments, Mr.
Attorney?
Chair.
Board Member McCoy?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Nguyen, I don't believe, if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe that there's a role for a city manager called out in the utility special district charter, is there?
I don't recall, Mr. McCoy. I did
Okay,
have the
so-
charter up earlier, and I don't have it up anymore.
So certainly, Mr. Evans, to your point, is this was never designed to be operated and ran by the city manager. And that's been well established, and even the city has agreed that's actually the district has agreed that there was no role for a city manager. So this idea that one person can do everything is just impractical. And I think if you had a certainly segregation of duties at the very minimum, I mean, to that point, that's exactly why we have an item that was authorized by this board to pay for a fire station utilities that wasn't even approved by this board. One person cannot serve multiple masters, and I'm sorry, no man can serve multiple masters. So you either love one or hate the other, and that's the thing that I think is happening with UD. We're getting the short end of the stick because we don't have a dedicated 100% of the time board reported utility special district director. So no different than the CRA. Nobody can really operate three different positions. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Board Member McCoy. Mayor? Board Member Miller Anderson?
I do want to say that I do believe that we are making quite a bit of progress. There was a time when we had people in the position who was there for quite a while, and a lot wasn't being done. So I think we really need to think about where we were. And, you know, I'm sure most of us were following things at that time around 2015, 16. There were a lot of people who were in positions who had been there but weren't doing anything. Things were being covered up and making it seem like things were being done, but they weren't. And so I think now we're a part of the group that's trying to make the change and make things better. And I think the efforts have been very great considering where we were. So I want to make sure that we recognize that we are nowhere where we were. We were not. We were in a bad situation back then. And we are making a lot of progress. And I will continue to say that is a big credit to Mr. Evans and his leadership and his team. Because there was a time when things were really bad off and people were being deceived and they thought things were fine, but they were not. And so we're making a lot of progress. And I think we should be very proud of where we are trying to make things better. And we have leadership in place that are doing it. So I don't want us to discredit that because we've made progress, and Mr. Evans has been a big part of that, along with Ms. Jacobs and those who have been around in the last few years. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Miller Anderson. Board Member Lanier?
Yeah, I just wanted to say the same thing in terms of Ms. Deirdre Jacobs, in terms of her dedication to this water plant. Certainly Mr. Lowe, but Ms. Jacobs has certainly carried this utility district. It was, when we first got here, the city was down half the wells that we use. And Ms. Jacobs was instrumental in getting all of those up. She was instrumental in getting the fact that for 6 or 7 years, we were on a list for the health department because of the chemicals and because what was happening with our water. She was able to lift that. So there's a lot of things that Ms. Jacobs, and certainly no a shade to you, Mr. Lowe. You've done a wonderful job. But I just want to thank Ms. Jacobs for her dedication and her work to getting this water plant built.
And thank you for your comments. And I would echo those sentiments. I agree with where we've come from, but I do know that this board is very aggressive in getting some amazing things done. From where we are now to the board that we have, I am bullish on this board. I think that we can get a phenomenal things done. And Mr. Evans, I do want to thank you for the work you've brought us to this time. I do believe that he needs help, though. He needs additional support. And the hiring issues across this nation have caused for him to have some struggles in certain departments. But That doesn't mean we can't keep pushing to be better and better and better. So where we were before, I believe, Ms. Melanderson, you've got an opportunity to see both sides, and this board is working as aggressively as possible, and we can agree, we can disagree. And I think we've always said we just don't want to agree without being disagreeable. So we push the city forward. We're going to push it forward and give as much support to our staff. And even when my colleagues tend to go a little hard on staff, it's more so for the improvement, betterment, and support of the city of Riviera Beach. So as much support as we can give, we're policymakers, and that's our role here. But if we see something, I want us to continue to call it out and support it. And Ms. Jacobs, thank you for stepping in again. As my colleague said, thank you for stepping in and taking care and taking care of our utility district, the most precious thing that we have in our city. Because when we needed you the most, you stepped up and you stood out and you did what was necessary. And Mr. Lowe, thank you for your work. So our staff, we're proud of you. We're very excited to continue to be here. And if we're questioning certain things, it's just to improve the quality of work we have and see how we can continue to build on it. So we'll continue these conversations and discussions. If there's no further business in the city, this meeting's adjourned.